Games with Jeff. Folks, in the introduction to these videos I almost always make some kind of dumb joke about the spec I'm currently discussing. But not this time. This time it's going to be different. Instead of a dumb joke, I'm going to ask you all a rhetorical question. Why should you play Unholy Death Knight? Well, it's really pretty easy, just look at this awesome sword. It's a giant twisty death sword of doom. If this doesn't make you reroll DK, then nothing will. And if you do reroll DK, then I think you're in for a treat, because Unholy is a truly enjoyable spec. Lots of buttons to press, a cool aesthetic, and you get to rock a badass twisty red sword of doom. Frost DKs are always whining and moaning that they don't get to use two-hand weapons anymore. Laugh at them, fellow Unholy mains. We are obviously Blizzard's favorite DK spec. Okay, true enough, Unholy was a mixed bag in Legion. Strong in Tomb of Sargeras, but then a bit underpowered in Antorus. Sure, yeah, if you were a good player you could bring the DPS as Unholy, but there sure were a lot fewer Unholy DKs running around over the last couple months. A friend of mine who preferred Unholy switched to Frost for his progression rating. It's a bit of a shame to have their fortunes reversed so quickly, but that's how it goes in WoW. Nobody can be on top forever, after all. Unholy Death Knights got to experience both the dizzying heights as well as the terrible, tragic lows. But which of these versions of Unholy is going forward into BFA? Will the spec bring the awesome two-handed DPS of Tomb, or the weak, non-sustained AoE damage of Antorus? Well, sit down, turn around, and pay attention, folks, because today we're going to take a look at Unholy Death Knight as it currently plays on the BFA beta. And to be honest, Unholy DK is a bit lucky when it comes to changes. They are one of the few specs that get to continue using their artifact ability from Legion. And not only that, but it's baseline and not just a talent. I felt that the Legion rotation for Unholy DK was especially good. Creating and bursting wounds made for a fun gameplay loop, while the artifact ability, minion, and diseases gave the player a bit more to help pad out the spec. It was sufficiently interesting while at the same time not being overwhelming or unwieldy. The rotation will remain fairly similar to how it was in Legion. Use Festering Strike to create wounds and Scourge Strike to consume them. Make sure that you keep Outbreak on the enemy while using Death Coil to spend your excess runic power and any free procs that you generate. Use Dark Transformation on your minion on cooldown, and Army of the Dead on pull, and again as often as you can during each fight. Unholy thus has a few more buttons than some other specs, but quite a few of them you don't have to press all the time. This helps the spec to feel complete and varied, but doesn't require a billion buttons being pressed all the time. Like Frost, Unholy has seen the return of the fan-favorite Death's Advance ability. Wraith's Walk was largely despised by a significant number of DK players, so hopefully the return of this long-lost movement ability will make people happy. There are a few other quality of life changes. For instance, Festering Strike now generates 2 to 3 wounds instead of 3 to 4. This makes the opening rotation a lot more predictable, because the players don't have to worry about generating too many wounds. Apocalypse bursts 4 wounds, so the player can always use Festering Strike twice now before Apocalypse. The talent changes for Unholy alter the spec a bit from how it played in Legion as well, though quite a few talents have moved around. The first row has Infected Claws, All Will Serve, and Clawing Shadows, all of which are Legion-era talents. Infected Claws makes it so that your ghoul has a 20% chance to cause a festering wound for each attack. All Will Serve allows you to have an extra minion who deals damage, and Clawing Shadows replaces Scourge Strike and makes it do all shadow damage and have greater range. None of these are especially interesting talents, and I expect that the one that gives an extra minion will be weak like it was in Legion. The 57 row has 2 passive abilities and 1 active. The first, Bursting Sores, makes your wounds deal more damage when they burst, and also deal AoE damage. The second, Ebb and Fever, makes your Plague from Outbreak deal more damage over half the time. And the third, Unholy Blight, causes small insects to sting all nearby enemies. I appreciate that each of these talents buffs a different way of dealing AoE damage. I like for players to have a number of different choices to select from. The 58 row has utility. Grip of the Dead, which makes Death and Decay reduce enemy movement. Death's Reach, which makes Death Grip have a longer range and resets its cooldown if you kill an enemy. And Asphyxiate, which is a 4-second stun on a 45-second cooldown. The 60 tier again has 2 passives and 1 active ability. Pestilent Pustules, gotta love these Unholy ability names, makes bursting a wound have a chance to increase your rune regeneration speed. Harbinger of Doom makes it so that your free Death Coil procs more often, and can store up to 2 charges. Finally, Soul Reaper deals damage, generates runes, and grants haste if the target dies while afflicted by the ability. I like that Harbinger of Doom on this tier makes the Death Coil procs a bit easier with the second charge. That has been nice for newer players who are learning the spec. The 75 tier has Spell Eater, which makes Anti-Magic Shell stronger, Wraith Walk, which is the same ability it was in Legion, but now a talent, and Death Pact, which is an interesting self-heal that makes external healing less powerful for 15 seconds. I like that all three selections here are diverse and provide defense, movement, or healing. On the other hand, it sucks to lose out on Corpse Shield, which was a very strong defensive cooldown. The 90 tier has Pestilence, Defile, and Epidemic. Pestilence is just a simple passive that makes Death and Decay have a chance to apply extra wounds, and Defile is the same fairly boring upgrade to Death and Decay that it was before, but Epidemic is, I think, a bit exciting because it's on this tier now. It provides on-demand AoE damage, and if it is tuned to a decent level, then it could provide a bit more to Unholy's AoE rotation. Finally, the 100 tier has changed a bit. Unholy Frenzy, which periodically increases the player's haste, has now been moved to this tier, and is performing pretty strongly at the moment. Army of the Damned is the passive Your Spam ability now lowers the cooldown of your burst cooldown talent that every spec seems to have now. The interesting thing though is that Summon Gargoyle is now a talent and not baseline. Personally, I think this is a great change. Why? Well, I didn't like the playstyle a lot in Legion. Sure, having Dark Arbiter as an integral part of your single target rotation increased the skill cap. The majority of your DPS was concentrated in windows where you had your Arbiter summoned, but I didn't like the feeling of my dinky talent pet doing so much of my damage. As an Unholy DK, I want my giant sword, my damage over time effects, and my main minion to be doing the most damage. I also didn't like the Beast Mastery Zookeeper build, so I guess I'm just not a fan of summoning dinky little pets every once in a while. Hopefully Unholy Frenzy continues to be a strong talent on this tier, because I like the way the spec plays with it a lot more than I do with Gargoyle or Arbiter. Also, the damage gain is now only 1% for every 2 runic power spent, so it will likely not be such a large portion of the DK's full damage, which is nice. Overall, I feel like Unholy is in a pretty good place. Some of the shortcomings with the Legion version, like the problem with the opener and the fact that Arbiter was almost always required when you're going single target, those problems have been fixed. Hopefully having multiple AoE options on the 57 and 90 tiers will allow the spec to do a better job at sustained AoE. A few of the passives are a bit boring, but at least the talents do give the player the opportunity to have more buttons to press, even if they don't always slot them into the rotation perfectly. Unholy suffers a bit from being so similar to its Legion version, but overall I'm excited for the spec moving forward. I think it's one of my favorite melee specs right now. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments if you're thinking of playing Unholy, or if you're over the whole undead minion thing. If you enjoyed the video, please consider pushing the like button or even subscribing. It helps the channel out quite a bit. There are links in the description below to my Patreon account, Twitter, and Facebook. Special thanks to my patrons who donate their hard-earned money to support the cause. Without their generosity, I wouldn't be able to make these videos. I really appreciate it, folks. Until next time, friends, take care.